As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, Harold stood at the front door, his tackle box and gear heavy in his hands. The peacefulness of the morning contrasted sharply with the bittersweet pang in his chest. "Do you have everything, dear?" Margaret asked, her voice laced with both warmth and concern. Harold smiled, a touch of mischief in his eyes. Just my fishing gear, and a whole lot of peace and quiet waiting for me at the cabin. What more could a man need?" Margaret tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly. "Just be careful, okay? You never know what kind of surprises nature might have in store." He chuckled, planting a gentle kiss on her forehead. "I'll be fine. Just me, the lake, and a few fish to catch. What could possibly go wrong?" He pulled her close and kissed her softly, imprinting the warmth of home onto his heart. The scent of her lavender perfume mingled with the crisp morning air, anchoring him to the moment. "Promise I'll be back by Friday," he whispered against her hair, holding her a moment longer, savoring the comfort of her presence. With one last look at the home they had built together, Harold turned and made his way to the old pickup truck parked beneath the oak tree. The tires crunched over the gravel as he drove away, leaving behind the familiar sights and sounds of his life. As he approached the winding road that led to the cabin, nestled among towering pines and the shimmering surface of the lake, an unsettling feeling settled in his gut. He shook it off, attributing it to the isolation he often felt in his retreat. It was just him and the peaceful wilderness. But deep in those woods, unseen and lurking, something watched. Its massive silhouette blended seamlessly with the shadows, a creature born of myths and whispers. Bigfoot had other plans for the quiet week Harold envisioned. The cabin stood proudly at the edge of the lake, a rustic log structure that felt more like a friend than a mere shelter. Sunlight sparkled across the water's surface, inviting and peaceful. Harold parked the truck, grabbed his gear, and stepped onto the familiar creaking porch. He set the tackle box down with a thud and took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh scent of pine and earth. This was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the chaos of life. As he stepped inside, he felt a rush of nostalgia. Every corner held memories, from summer afternoons spent fishing with Margaret to quiet nights spent reading by the fire. After unpacking, Harold made his way down to the dock, casting his line into the crystal-clear water. The tranquil sounds of nature enveloped him. The gentle lapping of waves, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the distant calls of birds. For a moment, all felt right in the world. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, a strange sound pierced through the evening calm. A distinct rustling in the world nearby, followed by what sounded like a low growl. Harold's heart quickened, a creeping unease washing over him. He paused, tense and alert, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "Probably just a deer," he muttered to himself, though he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Returning to his fishing, he tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. Selina Hoodlander, and he vaulted only a few feet. Night fell like a curtain, and the peaceful ambience shifted. The gentle night sounds morphed into an eerie symphony. Harold lit the cabin's old lantern, its warm glow pushing back the creeping shadows. He set up a small fire, hoping the flames would chase away the unease that lingered in the air. As he settled down with a book, a sudden loud crash echoed outside, sending him bolting upright. He dropped the book, heart racing as he moved cautiously to the window. The moonlit landscape looked peaceful, but something felt distinctly wrong. Then he saw it, a colossal figure lurking at the edge of the trees. It was covered in dark fur, its posture both formidable and strangely captivating. Harold blinked, convinced he was imagining things, but when he looked again, the creature was still there, half-hidden in the shadows. Panic surged through him. "What in the world?" he whispered, backing away from the window before the creature could see him. He grabbed the flashlight, hands trembling as he flicked it on. He shone the light outside, illuminating the very spot where he had seen the silhouette. Nothing. The tree line appeared unchanged, but carried an ominous silence. Taking a deep breath, he tried to calm his racing heart, rationalizing that perhaps it was just his eyes playing tricks in the dim light. But deep down, he knew someone was watching him. Harold's breaths came in shallow gasps as the weight of the evening settled heavily on him. The warm glow of the lantern flickered, casting restless shadows across the cabin's interior. He clutched the flashlight tightly, mind racing with questions. Had he truly seen that creature? Or was it all a figment of his imagination, fueled by isolation? He tried to dismiss the fear, attributing it to an overactive imagination. A good night's sleep would set everything straight. But sleep eluded him, and he found himself peering out the window intermittently, half expecting to see the looming figure again. The forest remained silent, but the feeling of being watched was ever present. Hours passed. A cacophony of rustling leaves and distant calls filled the void of silence as the night deepened. Just as he began to drift, a crack echoed from outside, louder and closer this time. Harold jolted upright again, the flashlight in his hand trembling as he aimed it at the source of the sound. "Who's there?" he called out, forcing his voice to steady. The only response was the chilling rustle of branches. Harold stood up and shuffled to the door, pushing it open with a creak that seemed deafening in the stillness. He stepped onto the porch, the cool night air enveloping him. He turned his flashlight into the woods, the beam slicing through the darkness. The light caught a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him from the edge of the tree line, wide and unblinking. Slowly, the creature stepped forward, revealing more of its massive frame in the beam of light. Fur dark as night covered its body, and it stood nearly 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs. Despite its frightening appearance, there was an almost oddly curious look in its eyes, as if it were studying him just as much as he was studying it. Harold's instinct screamed at him to retreat inside the cabin, but something kept him rooted to the spot. The creature tilted its head, observing, not advancing, its expression a mix of curiosity and caution. Just leave my cabin alone," Harold stammered. "I'm just here to fish." For a moment, a tense silence stretched between them. Then, as if responding to his words, Bigfoot let out a low rumble that echoed through the woods. It wasn't a growl, but more of a deep, resonating call, an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. Harold took a hesitant step back, still clutching the flashlight. "No, really, I mean it," he called out, unsure of what to do next. Panic surged through him as he rushed back into the cabin, slamming the door behind him. He pressed his back against it, heart racing, listening intently. Outside, the sounds of the forest returned, a stark contrast to the silence that filled the cabin. Had the creature moved on? He peered through the window again, but the figure was gone. All that remained was the darkened silhouette of the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. As he paced the small cabin, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a sense of deep intrigue mixed with fear. What did Bigfoot want? Why was it so interested in him? Avoiding the urge to bolt back home, Harold remembered the stories he had once dismissed, tales of a creature misunderstood, protector of the woods, and guardian of the wild. A question started to form in his mind. What if there was more to this encounter than just fear? With the dawn still hours away, Harold couldn't shake the feeling that this night was just the beginning of something far deeper than he could have ever imagined. As the shadows of dawn crept slowly across the landscape, Harold lay in bed, unusually restless. Sleep had evaded him for hours, his mind racing with thoughts of the creature just beyond the woods. Just as he began to drift off, a loud thump jolted him awake, echoing in the stillness of the morning. Heart pounding, he grabbed the flashlight and rushed to the window, peering out into the waning darkness. The area around the cabin appeared untouched, but an uneasy feeling gripped him. The creature could still be out there. He took a calming breath, insisting that it was just his imagination. After all, he had come to fish, not to encounter a monster. But the next sound sent panic racing through him. A series of violent knocks against the cabin walls. "What's there? What's this?" The creature could still be out there. He took a deep breath, sensing that it was more likely the window. Erica didn't hear anything else. Could get more sensitive with his head. Standing up and opening his eyes, he saw the flash of his antique machine. It was as if something colossal was trying to break in. Harold's mind raced as he moved to the door, fear clawing at his insides. "What do you want?" he shouted, though part of him knew he might not receive an answer. The only response was a deep growl that shook the very foundation of the cabin. With determination mixed with dread, he opened the door a crack, ready to confront whatever was out there. The moment the door creaked open, he was met with an avalanche of noise. A primal roar erupted from the tree line, filling the air with terror and chaos. Bigfoot charged forward, its massive frame silhouetted against the early morning light. "Get back!" Harold yelled, slamming the door shut and bolting it tight. His heart raced as he heard the creature's immense weight crashing against the wooden frame, rattling it violently. The cabin felt so small, and he began to realize just how vulnerable he truly was. The relentless pounding continued, each blow a reminder of the creature's raw power. Harold grabbed a heavy fishing rod, hoping it might serve as a makeshift weapon. He backed away from the door, eyes darting around the room for any means of defense. Suddenly, the door burst open, splintering against the wall. The sight of Bigfoot, fur bristling and eyes gleaming with primal rage, sent chills down his spine. The creature was more massive than he could have imagined, its growl vibrating through the air as it advanced toward him menacingly. Harold swung the fishing rod in defense, but it had little effect. Bigfoot batted at his side effortlessly, sending him stumbling back. In a flurry of instinct, Harold dashed for the window, fully aware he had to escape or be consumed by the terror that loomed before him. With a fierce determination, he jumped through the open window, tumbling into the damp grass outside. In an adrenaline-fueled frenzy, he dashed toward the dock, legs pumping beneath him as he raced to the water's edge. He could hear the thunderous footsteps of Bigfoot pursuing him, the ground shaking with each massive stride. Reaching the lake, Harold glanced back, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The creature stood close, its eyes locked onto him, unfazed by the water that separated them. He quickly scanned the lake for a means of escape. His old rowboat sat bobbling quietly, a short distance away. Harold slowly made his way over until he hooked a line in the ripland. Without hesitation, he sprinted for it, plunging into the water and pulling the boat closer as he scrambled to board it. He could hear the creature's heavy breathing growing louder, a mix of frustration and fury. Just as he settled into the boat, Bigfoot leapt forward, trying to reach him. The enormous hand grabbed the edge of the dock, splintering the wood, but Harold was quick. He shoved off, desperate to put distance between himself and the creature. The rowing was frantic and clumsy as he fought against the waves, adrenaline coursing through his veins. But even as he escaped, he could feel Bigfoot's piercing glare on him, a sense of determination emanating from the creature. This wasn't over. As he paddled deeper into the lake, fear mingled with the fierce instinct to survive. Whispers of the stories he had laughed at echoed in his mind. Bigfoot wasn't just a cryptid, it was a force of nature, and it wouldn't rest until it caught him. Panic clawing at his chest, Harold fought to maintain focus as he frantically rowed the small boat away from the cabin. The water splashed around him, the sounds of nature drowned out by the roaring heartbeat in his ears. He couldn't shake the feeling that Bigfoot was closing in, even as he glanced back toward the shore. The lake stretched before him, vast and seemingly endless. Above him, the early morning sky brightened into a stark blue, mocking his growing dread. With every pull of the oars, he wrestled with the weight of exhaustion and fear. The current felt stronger than usual, dragging at the boat, as if the lake itself were conspiring against him. Suddenly, a massive splash echoed behind him, followed by a deep, reverberating roar. Harold's heart lurched as he turned to see Bigfoot launching itself into the water, arms churning through the waves with terrifying speed. Shock surged through Harold. The creature was surprisingly agile, its sheer determination evident in the way it closed the distance. With adrenaline surging, he rowed harder, every stroke of the oar sending tension through his muscles. But the boat was unsteady, wobbling beneath him as he fought against fear and fatigue. Just as he felt the first hint of safety from the shore, he sensed a shadow emerge beneath the water. a ripple that quickly grew larger. He glanced over his shoulder, seeing Bigfoot breaching the surface, its massive head rising like a monstrous periscope. The creature's eyes locked onto him with chilling determination. Just then, a wave crashed against the side of his boat, tipping precariously to the right. "No! No!" he shouted, flailing instinctively to regain balance. With a desperate heave, he righted the boat, but not without losing precious momentum in the process. Panic surged through him as he realized that Bigfoot was closing the gap with terrifying speed. Harold felt a sudden surge of determination. He had to find a way to outsmart the creature. Glancing around, he spotted a cluster of thick trees on a distant shore, an area of tangled branches and underbrush that might offer shelter if he reached it in time. With renewed resolve, he focused on the shore ahead, the thought of safety spurring his muscles into action. He needed to buy himself some time. As he reached into the boat, he fumbled for his fishing gear, praying it would be of use. He found a small fishing net and, with a hasty decision, tied it to one of his paddles. "Come on," he muttered, adrenaline coursing through him as he paddled furiously toward the trees. Behind him, the water churned violently as Bigfoot swam closer, creating waves that rocked the boat dangerously. The creature let out another roar, both a promise and a threat. With every stroke, Harold's arms burned. But he pushed through, determined to reach the safety of the shore. As he neared the trees, he could see branches reaching out toward him, like fingers, beckoning for refuge. He made one final push, lunging the boat toward the shallows. The boat grounded itself in the mud, and Harold sprang out before it could drift back into the lake. Rolling onto the banks, he almost fell into the water again, but managed to stumble onto solid ground, panting heavily. Behind him, Bigfoot surged from the water, its massive figure pulling itself onto the shore, water pouring off its fur and glistening in the sunlight. The sight sent a fresh wave of terror through Harold as he sprinted toward the thicket of trees, plunging into the underbrush. Branches snagged at his clothes, leaves clung to him, the forest closing around him as he flailed through. Harold could hear the creature crashing through the foliage, growls echoing off the trees, each sound more menacing than the last. He zigzagged through the woods, hoping to confuse his pursuer. Adrenaline fueled his escape, but exhaustion began to weigh him down, and he could hear the muffled sounds of Bigfoot closing in. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath him. A root he hadn't seen snagged his foot, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Pain shot through him as he momentarily lost his bearings. He could hear Bigfoot's heavy footsteps stomping closer, seismic forces moving through the ground. Gritting his teeth, he rolled over, pushing himself back to his feet. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving. As he pushed onward, he came upon a small ravine. Without thinking, he leaped down into the shallow dip, landing awkwardly but managing to stay upright. The trees above him formed a dense canopy, blocking his view but shrouding him in darkness. Tentatively, he raised his head and cast the light toward the distance. It was trickier than it sounded. Hope flickered like the dying light of a candle as Harold crouched down, hidden among the twisted roots and fallen leaves of the ravine. His breath came in ragged gasps as he listened intently, the thundering of Bigfoot's footsteps reverberating through the forest above him. The creature's growls echoed ominously, a reminder of the primal danger that stalked him. The forest was alive with sounds, but Harold felt an eerie silence settle in around him. He glanced around, trying to assess his surroundings. The ravine was steep, flanked by thick roots and tangled underbrush. Perhaps Bigfoot would befall. If he stayed quiet and still, perhaps Bigfoot wouldn't find him. Moments stretched into what felt like an eternity. The growling faded, but didn't disappear completely. A part of him feared that the creature had lost interest. Another part of him knew that it was merely biding its time. For all he knew, Bigfoot was perched only a few feet away, listening, watching. After what felt like an indeterminate amount of time, he heard an ominous crack of a branch above him. He stiffened, heart racing as he peered cautiously under the bramble. To his horror, he spotted movement on the edge of the ravine. Bigfoot loomed there, its massive figure silhouetted against the brightening sky, scanning the area as if searching for a sign of his presence. Death was near. Harold's instincts kicked in. He had to keep quiet. He lay flat against the cold, damp ground, barely daring to breathe. The creature sniffed the air, head tilted slightly as it tried to catch his scent. Desperation filled Harold as he slid further down the ravine, careful not to make a sound. He had to put distance between them. But just as he thought he had evaded it, Bigfoot let out a chilling roar, louder than before, shaking the leaves around him. There was no mistaking that the creature had spotted something. Footprints, perhaps. A trace of him darting into the undergrowth. It plunged down the ravine, moving with a speed and grace Harold hadn't anticipated from something so large. Realizing he couldn't remain hidden any longer, Harold scrambled away from the edge, looking for any escape route through the dense foliage. His heart raced, beating loudly in his ears. He spied a narrow path that sloped upward toward the hill beyond the ravine, crawling to where it began before pushing himself to his feet. He sprinted up the incline, fueled by sheer survival instinct. Harold saw a light. As he climbed, he could hear Bigfoot crashing through the underbrush behind him. The creature's strength was undeniable, uprooting saplings with ease as it pursued him. Fear mixed with desperation. The nearer it got, the more impossible escape felt. With every second, the ravenous growls became more palpable, a reminder that he was running out of time. Bursting out onto the hillside, Harold looked left and right. He had to make a choice. The wooded area spread out in both directions, but ahead, he glimpsed a flicker of sunlight reflecting off the water. It was the lake, perhaps a quarter-mile ahead, and a trap if he dared venture back toward it. But the trees on either side offered limited cover, as he'd already seen the creature's relentless speed. There was no time to think. He had to choose. With no clearer path, he veered left into a dense thicket, praying it would provide enough cover to hide from Bigfoot. He pressed himself against a tree, heart thundering in his chest as he fought to silence his breath. Trapping piece. The shelter and roar sounded growing, filling the air with squeaks. The growling grew louder again. now accompanied by the sounds of crashing branches and snapping twigs. Bigfoot was relentless, the creature's long strides seeming to take enormous ground with every step. Harold dared a glance, peeking through the leaves. Just ahead, he could see Bigfoot's mass pushing through the thicket, eyes fierce and focused. As the creature came closer, Harold's pulse raced. Now was not the time for fear. He needed to act. He noticed a fallen branch lying nearby, thick and sturdy. It would make for a poor weapon, but it was all he had. He braced himself, gripping it tightly in both hands. "Niacid, yalla." In a moment of bravery, fueled by sheer will to survive, Harold hurled the branch away from him into another direction. The noise echoed through the woods, and for a split second, Bigfoot paused, drawn to the sound. Heart pounding, Harold took advantage of the distraction, darting out from his hiding place and racing away. The creature roared in anger, responding to the sudden movement. Harold bolted, pushing through the underbrush, branches snapping against him as he tore through the forest. He sprinted downhill, praying he wouldn't trip or stumble. The lake came into view, glistening temptingly ahead. With renewed determination, Harold sprinted toward the water's edge, every muscle in his body screaming in protest as he pushed himself to the limit. The sound of splintering branches behind him told him that Bigfoot was not far behind, and the knowledge spurred him on. He could almost feel the creature's breath on his neck, a primal reminder of the danger that lurked just out of sight. As he approached the lake shore, he glanced back to see Bigfoot barreling through the trees, a hulking mass of fury and power. Its eyes fixed on him with an intensity that sent electricity through his veins. There was no time to contemplate what he was doing. He needed to act. Looking at his prey, Keyes quickly realizing that he really didn't have time to still to fake. There was no time to contemplate what he was doing. He needed to act. Harold reached the water's edge and hesitated only a moment. The lake, while a potential refuge, was also a gamble. He knew the creature could swim, and the water would not shield him for long. Still, he took a deep breath and leapt into the lake, the cold water shockingly refreshing against his frantic, heated skin. He swam hard, pushing through the water, all thoughts of fishing and peaceful afternoons gone. His heart raced, each stroke a desperate attempt to put distance between himself and Bigfoot. The cold seeped into his bones, but he fought through the chill, glancing back periodically to monitor the beast's movements. As he paddled further into the lake, his eyes widened as he saw Bigfoot reach the water's edge, towering over the waves. The creature paused for a moment, gesturing, as if hesitating to follow. Harold seized on the moment, knowing he couldn't let up, but recognizing that he'd bought himself a little time. However, Bigfoot's curiosity won. With a primal roar of frustration, it plunged into the water, powerful strokes propelling it forward as it chased after him with frightening speed. Harold kicked harder, struggling against the current as the creature closed the distance. Each movement felt heavier than the last as water splashed wildly around him. Harold felt Bigfoot's hands on his shoulders, his legs shaking from the water as it slapped fell around him. Just when he thought he'd gained a breath of distance, He heard the rush of water behind him growing louder. The creature was nearly on him, its massive form cutting through the water like a torpedo. Adrenaline surged, igniting a brutal urge to survive. He had to find a way out. Deo. Ahead, he spotted a cluster of rocks jutting out from the lake, forming a small island. If he could just make it there, he might have a fighting chance to outsmart Bigfoot. He turned and began to swim toward the rocks as fast as he could muster, aware that every stroke would count. Harold's muscles ached and burned, but he pressed on, finally reaching the jagged rocks. Gripping onto one, he heaved himself up, dragging his body out of the water, just as Bigfoot burst forth, roaring with anger. Water cascaded off the creature as it clambered onto the rocky edge, slipping slightly, but regaining its grip. A sheer testament to its strength and agility. Heart hammering in his chest, Harold scrambled to the highest point of the rocks, backpedaling away from the edge as Bigfoot approached, towering and furious. The creature's dark eyes narrowed as it regarded him, anger visible in its growls, deep and resonating. From his perch atop the rock, Harold surveyed his surroundings hastily. He noticed a cascading waterfall on one side of the rocky plateau, forming a turbulent pool below. It was dangerous, but there didn't seem to be any other escape. The creature glared at him with fierce intensity, and though he could see curiosity beneath the rage, he understood it wouldn't let him go easily. With little time to think, he took a deep breath and chose his course of action. He launched himself to the side, using the rhythmic sounds of the waterfall to mask his movements. Bigfoot responded instantly, lunging toward him as he leaped from the rocky surface, falling through the air toward the water below. He hit the water hard, plunging deep beneath the surface. Desperation surged through him as he swam furiously, scrambling for any hint of safety. Behind him, he could hear Bigfoot crashing into the water, the sound of splashing reverberating throughout the lake. Harold swam with every ounce of energy he had left, focusing on creating distance. He didn't dare look back, though the instinct told him he couldn't escape quickly enough. The current swirled around him, pulling at his legs and slowing his movements, but he fought against it. Just when he thought he might drown in the desperation, he caught sight of the rocky outcropping once more. Using the last of his strength, he kicked hard and propelled himself toward the shore, clawing his way onto solid ground. Pushing himself up on the bank, he gasped for breath, choking on water as he rolled onto his back. He had made it. For a fleeting moment, he dared to believe he had escaped the relentless grip of Bigfoot. As he lay on the shore, panting, the cool earth pressing against his back, Harold glanced nervously over his shoulder toward the lake. The sounds of the water thrashing and the distant roar echoed in his ears, an uneasy reminder that the threat was still very much alive. But with each labored breath, he felt a surge of newfound determination. This would not be the end for him. He pushed himself to sit up, surveying the area around him. The shoreline was littered with rocks and reeds, and the dense forest began only a few yards away, offering possible sanctuary and protection. He scrambled to his feet, legs unsteady from the exertion but fueled by an urgent need to put distance between himself and Bigfoot. He hesitated only for a moment to catch his breath, then tore off into the trees, the undergrowth clawing at his arms and legs as he wove through the foliage. As he ran, he kept his senses alert, acutely aware that he was not alone. The weight of the forest pressed in around him, leaves rustling ominously as he pushed deeper into the woods. The cacophony of life buzzed around him, yet all he could focus on was the thunderous footsteps that echoed ominously behind him. "Think, Harold, think," he muttered under his breath, desperately trying to formulate a plan. He needed to find a place to hide, a way to outsmart this force of nature. Ahead, he saw a thicket of bushes, thick with bramble. Without a second thought, he veered toward it, scrambling into the dense foliage. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it provided a momentary cover. He pressed himself down low, heart pounding in his chest, praying the creature wouldn't spot him. The heavy footsteps grew nearer, accompanied by deep, guttural growls that echoed through the trees. Harold held his breath, every muscle tensing as Bigfoot approached, moving slower now, as if it were searching. He clamped his hand over his mouth to muffle his breathing, every sound feeling amplified in the silence. Bigfoot paused just outside the bramble, its enormous silhouette barely visible through the leaves. Harold could see its powerful shoulders shifting and its massive head moving side to side, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air, searching for him. Tension tightened in Harold's chest as the creature shifted its weight, growing restless. He could feel the earth tremor as it moved, the low growl rumbling deep in its throat. It was aware he was close, and it wasn't going to give up without a fight. Realizing he couldn't hide forever, Harold scanned the area around him, seeking any path of escape if the need arose. A dwindling sense of desperation gnawed at him. If he didn't act soon, he wouldn't be able to. Summoning every ounce of courage, he shifted slightly to the left, trying to keep his movements slow and deliberate. When he caught a glimpse of an opening in the thicket, he knew he needed to make a move. Quietly, he began to inch toward it, carefully avoiding any sudden noises that might alert Bigfoot. But just as he felt he was almost in the clear, a sudden rustle erupted outside. Bigfoot snarled, lunging forward as if sensing his movements. It caught a glimpse of him, ruining his chance at stealth. Bellowing with primal fury, Bigfoot barreled toward the thicket, claws extended, massive hands reaching for him through the underbrush. Harold didn't think. He bolted from his hiding spot without a plan, racing through the forest with the creature hot on his heels. Branches scratched at his skin, and roots threatened to trip him, but he pressed on, each pulse of adrenaline pushing him forward. Fear propelled him, a force greater than his exhaustion. He zigzagged through the trees, the sound of Bigfoot's heavy footfalls echoing behind him as it pursued with relentless determination. "Hold on!" Harold's mind raced, darting between the instinct to survive and the need to find a safe haven. The woods felt suffocating, an impenetrable maze, and he couldn't shake the feeling that every moment brought him closer to his end. Desperation settled in anew as he navigated through the trees, wishing he could find a place to hide or an escape route. Out of nowhere, he remembered the folklore whispered by locals, stories of caves that were said to be hidden in the depths of the woods, once used by hunters and survivors like him. If he could find one, it might offer a crucial advantage, a way to hide from the beasts. With renewed purpose, he veered sharply to the left, adrenaline sharpening his instincts. He sprinted through the trees, glancing back over his shoulder. Bigfoot was gaining ground. Its breath labored and guttural, drawing closer with each powerful stride. Panic surged anew as Harold pushed himself harder, adrenaline masking the pain in his legs. The forest seemed to close in around him, shadows dancing ominously as he darted between trees, branches whipping past his face. "Caves, where are you?" he shouted to himself, desperately hoping to remember the vague directions he had heard from locals over the years. He recalled stories of hidden entrances near rocky outcroppings, places where hunters would huddle during storms or seek refuge from predators. His eyes scanned the terrain frantically, heart pounding as he ran. Just when he was about to lose hope, he spotted a rugged rock formation looming ahead, partially obscured by vines and foliage. The entrance of a cave peered out, like a dark mouth, inviting yet foreboding. He made a split-second decision, veering hard toward the cave as he darted past the stone. He ducked into the narrow opening, forcing himself against the cool, damp stone wall, praying Bigfoot wouldn't catch his scent, or, worse, follow him inside. Inside the cave, darkness enveloped him. Harold took a moment to adjust, the sudden shift from bright sunlight to deep shadow making him disoriented. He pressed himself back against the wall, breath coming in ragged bursts, quietly listening on the other side for the sound of Bigfoot approaching. The forest outside filled with sounds of chaos, the snapping of branches, the rustling of leaves, and then a sudden piercing roar from Bigfoot, vibrating through the air. The creature had reached the cave's opening, darting its head in and out as it peered inside, sniffing the air intensely. Harold's heart raced in synchrony with the fear racing through his veins. He moved deeper into the cave, cautiously navigating along the uneven ground, hoping there was enough rock between him and the land outside that might hide him from the creature's sight. Then there was a sound, low. Pressing his back flush against the wall, Harold held his breath, every nerve ending on high alert. He could hear Bigfoot's heavy breathing, almost as if it was directly outside the entrance, waiting, watching. Time dragged painfully, each second stretching into what felt like hours. The growling faded slightly, replaced by what sounded like Bigfoot sniffing around, its sharp instinct still searching for him persistently. Then, but instead of entering, Bigfoot let out a deep scream, pivoting away as if losing interest. The sounds of movement outside shifted, foliage rustling and being trampled, as the beast seemed to retreat just far enough that he could almost breathe again. Relief washed over Harold, but he knew this was only temporary. He needed to remain sharp. What if the creature circled back? He took another look around the cave, trying to assess how to make an escape as he began exploring the ground beneath him, hoping for a route out. The cave opened a bit further back, into darkness. Cautiously, he moved toward that opening, navigating the oppressive darkness as he inched forward. The sound of water trickled in the distance. Perhaps there was a stream or underground river that could guide him or give him another way out of the forest altogether. The deeper he went, the darker it became, until he could barely see his hand in front of his face. He moved forward, relying on his other senses, feeling the uneven ground, listening to the faint sounds of water, and staying aware of every echo that might hint at danger. Suddenly, he stumbled over something solid. His foot struck a rock, sending a small cascade of loose stones clattering into the darkness. The noise echoed loudly, and panic gripped him once more. He froze, straining to hear any response. Just then, a low growl reverberated through the cave. Bigfoot hadn't left. It was still close. The creature had likely been waiting outside, and now it had caught the sound of his movements within the cave. Harold could feel the hair on the back of his neck raise, the unmistakable chill of dread washing over him. Some instinct kicked in again, and he turned to retreat, moving backward as quietly as he could. Water splashed softly nearby. He followed the sound, hoping it could lead him to safety. As he found the water's edge, a narrow stream flowed through the cave, a possible escape route. His eyes adjusted slightly to the dimness, and he crouched down, lowering himself into the cool water. It would act as a barrier between him and Bigfoot, and if he could follow it, it might lead him somewhere away from this nightmare. Wading slowly through the stream, he felt the current tugging at his legs, the gentle flow giving him some sense of hope. Every step deeper into the water felt like a step away from danger, a way to navigate through this oppressive darkness without drawing attention to himself. He eased himself further in, anxious but determined to stay as quiet and low as possible. As he moved along the stream, he could hear the sound of Bigfoot pacing outside the cave entrance. The growls faded in and out, replaced by the occasional thud of massive feet stomping against the ground just beyond the cave's mouth. Harold's heart raced in time with the sounds. He could feel the tension palpable in the air as he pressed deeper into the water, trying to keep his breathing steady. Darkness enveloped him. The rough stone walls of the cave felt slick and cold against his hands. The sounds from outside became muffled. Perhaps the creature had grown impatient, or was searching elsewhere. Either way, he knew he could not linger. After what felt like an eternity, the stream began to widen. He continued moving cautiously, guided by the soft light filtering in through a narrow crack in the rock ceiling, an indication that there might be an exit ahead. The water was cooler here, flowing past him with a gentle insistence that urged him to keep going. As he approached the widening, he instinctively slowed, listening carefully for any sounds of movement. The rushing water cascaded down as he found a small opening, larger than before, the space opening up to what appeared to be a cave that led outside. But with it came the faintest hint of light and fresh air. With the flicker of hope lighting his chest, he crouched low and edged toward the light. The stream continued to guide him, its refreshing coolness, a balm against the fear that had gripped him so tightly. Just as he reached the new expanse, he paused, terrified to venture too far. The sounds of Bigfoot's growls had been replaced with an unsettling quiet. Had the creature decided not to search for him, or was it simply lying in wait, biding its time? Carefully peering around the corner of the rocky outcropping, he discovered a dimly lit cavern beyond. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like ancient chandeliers, glistening in the low light filtering through the crack above. The stream spilled into a small pool at the cave's edge. But would it be safe? Deciding he had little choice, Harold slid into the cave, heart thumping in his chest. He felt an overwhelming need to distance himself from Bigfoot, to regain his footing and figure out how he could escape this nightmarish encounter. Taking a deep breath, he crouched beside the pool, keeping his senses alert. He knew that while he had gained a moment's respite, Bigfoot was still out there, hunting for him. He needed to be smarter, to wait for the right opportunity to move again. Time stretched as he waited, listening intently as the faint echoes bounced off the cavern walls. It wasn't long before he heard movement. The unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps returning to the cave. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he instinctively ducked behind a rock formation, obscuring himself from view. Through a gap, he saw Bigfoot step into the cave, its massive body blocking most of the light from the entrance. The creature seemed agitated, snorting and pacing as it sniffed the air, searching for any trace of him. Rowling his resolve, Harold's mind raced. He needed to think beyond mere survival. He had to find a way to outsmart this creature. What had the locals said? Bigfoot was protective of its territory. It wasn't just hunting him. It was defending something. With clarity cutting through his fear, he realized that there was a chance to turn the tables. Instead of running, he could try to draw Bigfoot away from the cave's opening. Maybe then he could escape. He peered around the cavern, scanning for anything he could use. A large rock lay nearby, easy to lift. He could make noise, distract the creature, and use the stream's cover to escape. With determination and a plan forming, he carefully clutched the hefty stone, feeling its weight in his hands. "Wait! Wait!" Barak stammered, thinking faster. With the ground rumbling beneath Bigfoot's feet, Harold took a deep breath, summoning all his courage. He raised the stone and flung it toward the opposite wall of the cave, where it struck with a loud crack, sending echoes reverberating throughout the space. Bigfoot whipped its massive head in the direction of the noise, startled. The creature's growl became a low snarl as it moved toward the sound, pacing away from the entrance. "Lee!" shouted Bigfoot. "No!" Harold seized the moment and slipped away from his hiding spot, moving quickly but quietly toward the stream. He ducked low, scrambling toward the opening, as the creature investigated the source of the noise. As he reached the edge of the cave, Harold could see the sunlight streaming in through the gap, illuminating the world outside. The moment felt surreal, hope flaring in his chest despite the overwhelming dread coiled in his gut. He needed to act quickly before Bigfoot realized the ruse. Sneaking to the narrow exit, he paused for a split second to glance back. Bigfoot was fully focused on the spot where Harold had thrown the rock, sniffing and moving closer to the wall as it searched for the source of the sound. The creature's immense form was a terrifying reminder of the danger that still loomed, but it was distracted. This was his chance. Harold took a deep breath and slipped out of the cave, his feet finding purchase on the rocky ground outside. The sun washed over him, warm and bright, but he had no time to relish the feeling. He squeezed his eyes against the brightness, scanning the area for the safest path. The dense trees surrounded him once more, but he had to move quickly, ensuring he didn't get trapped again. With newfound resolve, he slipped into the underbrush, still aware of the sounds coming from inside the cave. The growling diminished momentarily, but was replaced with the rustling of leaves and branches snapping, a clear sign that Bigfoot was no longer satisfied with just investigating. "Smell that damp, sweetheart," he said to Sharon. Sharon relinquished her. Harold moved silently through the foliage, his heart racing with every step as he tried to put as much distance between himself and the creature as possible. His instincts guided him deeper into the woods, seeking the cover of the trees, hoping to find a cliff or some high ground that might provide a vantage point. The forest felt alive around him, every sound magnified. The gentle whispers of leaves in the breeze, the chattering of squirrels, and the distant call of birds. Yet all he could focus on was the fear gripping him like a vice. Every rustle and crack sent adrenaline surging through him, heightening his senses as he fought to keep moving. Just as he thought he might be gaining ground, a deep, guttural roar echoed through the trees, reverberating across the forest. Harold froze, terror spilling through him. Bigfoot was moving, and it was close. The ground shook as the massive creature crashed through the underbrush, its frustration palpable. His pulse quickened, and the urge to run surged through him, but he forced himself to remain steady. He ducked beneath a thick canopy of leaves, pressing himself against the cool, damp earth, hoping to blend into the forest. Bigfoot's footsteps thundered closer, a steady rhythm that made the earth vibrate beneath Harold. He held his breath, peeking through the leaves just in time to see the creature's massive form burst into view, charging through the forest like an unstoppable force. Harold could feel the panic rising, knowing he was outmatched in every way. Realizing he needed more than mere survival instincts, he took a moment to think. Bigfoot was territorial. Perhaps he could use that to his advantage. If he found a way to escape the creature's pursuit, he could find help, or a way to signal for rescue. With a sudden reckless idea, Harold began to climb a nearby tree, choosing one with a thick trunk and numerous branches. It was risky, but it was also his best option. As he pulled himself up, he felt the rough bark beneath his fingers, and adrenaline surged as he focused upward. He managed to find a sturdy branch that offered both cover and a clear view of the ground below. Settling on the branch, he took a moment to breathe, catching glimpses of Bigfoot as it continued to stomp through the underbrush, searching for him with laser-like focus. As the creature drew nearer, it stopped abruptly, scanning the area, its massive shoulders tensed. Harold held his breath, clenching the branch tightly. Bigfoot's growl turned to snorts as it continued sniffing the air, trying to sort through the many scents of the forest. The way its dark eyes narrowed told Harold that it was still tracking him. The word for possum comes from the Latin possum, which literally means mouth. Bigfoot could smell the branch tightly as it started tracking him. After a few tense moments, Bigfoot began to wander away from the tree, frustration seeping into its movements. Harold watched, his heart still hammering in his chest, as he desperately tried to stay hidden. Suddenly he heard what sounded like breaking branches from afar, in the opposite direction from where Bigfoot had been. The sound was faint at first, but quickly gained clarity. The low hum of voices accompanied it. Hikers, or perhaps some campers. Hope bloomed in Harold's chest as he watched Bigfoot's attention shift, the creature instinctively drawn to the new sounds. It turned, pacing in the direction from which the voices were coming, growling softly as it advanced, clearly irked by the disturbance. Seeing his opportunity, Harold clambered down the tree, moving cautiously to avoid alerting Bigfoot. Once on the ground, he kept his movements light and quick, knowing he needed to reach the approaching voices without drawing the creature's attention back to him. With practiced movements, Harold clambered down the tree and back into shadows. With careful, deliberate movements, Harold slipped away from the tree, staying low and using the underbrush as his cover. The chatter grew louder as he moved, infused with laughter and the sounds of gear being set up. As he crept closer, the excitement of possible rescue ignited a flicker of hope within him. Peering through the thick foliage, he eventually broke through the trees and stumbled into a clearing. Before him, a small group of hikers was gathered, setting up their campsite. They seemed oblivious to the danger lurking nearby, the sun shining brightly on their cheerful demeanor, a stark contrast to the terror he had just faced. With a mix of relief and urgency, Harold called out, "Help! You need to get out of here. There's something dangerous nearby." The hikers paused, startled by his sudden appearance. A few exchanged glances, confusion etched on their faces. One of them stepped forward, a burly man with a bushy beard. "Are you okay, man? What do you mean by dangerous?" Before Harold could explain, another hiker, a woman, squinted into the trees behind him. "What are you talking about? Is there a bear around or something?" No, it's not a bear," Harold insisted, his voice rising with panic. He could hear the distant growl of Bigfoot resonating through the trees, a warning that they were not as safe as they thought. "It's a creature, a giant, something. You need to pack up and leave now." The hikers exchanged dubious looks, and a sense of disbelief hung in the air. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the tree line. The ground shook as Bigfoot emerged from the thick underbrush, its towering form pushing aside branches and debris with ease. The creature paused at the edge of the clearing, growling low and warning. The group froze, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror. What the hell is that?" one of them whimpered, eyes wide as they took a step back. "That's what I've been trying to tell you," Harold shouted, though it felt too late. Bigfoot stepped forward, powerful and imposing. The hikers scattered almost instinctively, adrenaline kicking in as they turned to grab their backpacks, seeking to put as much distance between themselves and the creature as possible. "Run!" Harold shouted, motioning toward the trees. "Get away from here." Venley shrugged, having expected this. Harold grimaced. Chaos erupted as the group began to frantically try to escape, but Bigfoot was quicker. The creature lunged forward, letting out a furious roar that split the air with an overwhelming force. Harold felt the ground tremble beneath him as he grabbed the nearest hiker by the arm, urging them to move toward the thicker woods on the opposite side of the clearing. "Over here!" he yelled, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he led the way. They barreled through the underbrush, branches snapping behind them, with Bigfoot in pursuit. The frantic dash through the forest felt surreal, as if they were all part of a nightmare. Harold could hear the heavy thud of Bigfoot's footsteps, echoing not far behind, a reminder of the imminent danger roaring at their heels. Panic surged among the group as they jumped over fallen logs and dodged low branches, focused solely on survival. "Where are we going?" someone shouted, breathless with exertion. "Towards the road. We can make it if we push through," Harold yelled, trying to instill a sense of urgency as they raced onward. He could barely catch his breath. The adrenaline, though energizing, was also exhausting. As they dashed through the underbrush, Harold glimpsed over his shoulder at Bigfoot. Its enormous figure crashed through the trees like a force of nature, knocking down everything in its path as it pursued the group. The beast's growls echoed through the woods, a stark reminder of their vulnerability. They entered a narrower path, the dense forest finally beginning to thin out. In the distance, Harold spied the glimmer of the road, a sign of potential safety. But they had to make it there first. He pushed forward, calling back to the others. "Just a little further. Come on." With renewed motivation, the group pressed onward, the sight of the sunlit road ahead offering a glimmer of hope. But suddenly, the ground quaked, and Bigfoot crashed into view yet again, bounding with unnatural speed. With an immense leap, it closed the distance with terrifying ease, anger exuding from its powerful presence. "Yeah, keep moving," Harold shouted, turning one last time to see Bigfoot rearing back, ready to charge. He saw the other hikers scrambling, fear in their eyes, desperately trying to make it to the road. How? The sense of impending doom crested. They were so close, and yet fear threatened to overwhelm them. They pushed forward, the sight of freedom urging them on. Just as Harold reached the edge of the clearing, a massive vibration shook the ground beneath him. He turned to see Bigfoot charging directly toward them, its rage palpable. A deep roar escaped the creature as it lunged forward, ready to pounce. "Faster!" he yelled, instinctively shoving the nearest hiker, the young man, forward, urging him toward the road ahead. The sight of the sunlit asphalt ignited a primal urge to survive within Harold. "We're almost there, Jurai." "We're almost there," The group sprinted on, hearts pounding, legs burning, adrenaline heightening their senses. Behind them, the thunderous sound of Bigfoot's feet crashing down filled the air, drowning out the sounds of their frantic footsteps. The beast was relentless, closing the distance alarmingly fast. Harold didn't dare look back. The road was only a few more feet ahead, and with each step, hope blossomed back into his chest. He could see the outline of a car parked by the roadside, oblivious to the chaos unfolding in the woods. "Is Hackers true?" she asked. Then she stared pretentiously into the... "Keep going," he shouted, feeling a surge of determination. "We can make it." As they plunged into the clearing, the entire world seemed to slow. The road was right there, just beyond the trees, and with a final burst of speed, they broke through the underbrush. They scrambled onto the asphalt, panting heavily, their eyes wide with fear. She looked around, but before they could take another breath, a sound rippled through the air, a deep, resonating growl that echoed ominously behind them. Harold turned, adrenaline coursing through his veins, and his heart sank at the sight of Bigfoot emerging from the trees with furious intent. The beast skidded to a halt at the edge of the road, powerful muscles tensed and taut. It towered over them, eyes ablaze with primal fury. Harold felt a chill race down his spine as it let out a roar, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. For a moment, he and the group froze, paralyzed by fear. The raw intensity of the creature's gaze sent shivers through Harold's body, leaving him unable to think. Time seemed to stretch as they confronted the looming threat. Then, a brave voice pierced through the tension. "Get in the car, now!" shouted the bearded man from earlier, his eyes wide with determination as he pointed toward the vehicle parked just a few yards away. Harold snapped back into action, rallying the others. "Move! Get in!" he bellowed, bolting toward the car. He pushed open the door and jumped inside, his heart racing as the others scrambled in behind him, fear propelling them. Down from the start of the drive, and the driver's side door slammed shut, and the burly man quickly turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and in that moment, Harold felt a flicker of hope. They were so close to safety, yet the danger was still very real. He turned to see Bigfoot still looming at the edge of the road, studying the car with vicious intent, its massive form blocking the sunlight. The roar it let out echoed in defiance as the vehicle rattled beneath them, the creature seeming to know its quarry had escaped. "Go! Go!" Harold shouted frantically, the urgency in his voice evident as the driver slammed his foot on the accelerator. The tires screeched against the asphalt, kicking up gravel as they sped forward, leaving the clearing behind. The speed picked up as they barreled down the road, trees flashing by in a blur. Harold turned to look out the rear window, heart pounding as he expected to see Bigfoot in hot pursuit. But the towering creature remained behind, a dark silhouette against the bright backdrop of the forest. Harold still had his gun pointed at it. Are we safe?" The woman next to Harold breathed, her voice trembling. "I don't know," he replied, his heart still racing. "But we have to keep going until we're far away from here." As they drove further away from the cabin and into the depths of the forest, Harold felt a rush of relief wash over him. Yet mixed with relief was an undercurrent of fear and disbelief. They had narrowly escaped, but the memory of the creature's rage felt etched in his mind. Gradually the trees began to thin, and the road opened up to a wider expanse. As they continued driving, Harold noticed the tension in the vehicle ease. The others beginning to breathe easier, collective disbelief still hanging in the air. "What was that thing?" the driver finally asked, breaking the silence. "I've heard stories, but I thought it was just folklore." Harold shook his head, still processing the harrowing experience. "It's real. It's very real, and it protects its territory." The bearded man nodded somberly. "I've heard the legends, too. They say it can be as violent as it is curious. We're lucky to have made it out." As they drove down the winding road, Harold's mind spun with the events of the past few hours. Images of Bigfoot's massive frame and piercing gaze haunted him, the near encounter pressing against his chest like a weight. He had lived through a nightmare, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play. A profound connection between the creature and the untamed wilderness surrounding them. The car rolled on, the soothing sounds of the engine gradually bringing a sense of calm back to the group. But as they exchanged nervous glances and whispered questions, Harold felt an overwhelming urge to share his perspective. "I think," he began slowly, "that Bigfoot is more than just a monster in the woods. It's a guardian of its territory, a creature of instinct that defends its home like any other wild animal." "What do you mean?" the woman asked, her brow furrowed in thought. I mean, maybe it was protecting something. The way it reacted when we were close to its area, it wasn't just anger. It felt more like a warning. It didn't just want to attack us. It sought to drive us off." The others in the car exchanged skeptical glances, but the driver voiced what they all felt. "But why would it go after us? We weren't doing anything, just trying to enjoy the woods." "Nature doesn't always see it that way," Harold replied, still grappling with his thoughts. "To it, we could be viewed as a threat, intruders in its world. And lack of understanding has often made us see things as monsters, instead of appreciating their role in the ecosystem." "Are you saying we should just accept the danger?" the bearded man challenged, incredulity lining his voice. "No, I'm not saying that. What I mean is that maybe we need to rethink how we view these creatures. Coexistence doesn't mean getting closer, but learning to respect their space. The more we encroach, the more we provoke, and it's only going to escalate." The group fell silent, each person lost in their thoughts as they processed Harold's words. The reality of their experience lingered like a shadow, yet his perspective opened a window of understanding that hadn't been considered before. They drove on, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting a golden hue across the landscape. The panic started to fade, replaced by a sense of surreal disbelief. Finally, they reached a small town, a cluster of buildings nestled amidst the trees. "Let's find a place to stay for the night," the driver suggested, his voice steadying. "This has been too much for one day." They pulled into a small motel, neon lights flickering overhead amid the encroaching twilight. Harold stepped out of the car, his legs stiff from the cramped space. As he moved toward the motel entrance with the others, he couldn't shake the remnants of his encounter. The looming specter of Bigfoot still gnawing at him. Inside, they were greeted by the owner, an older gentleman with a warm smile. "Welcome. You folks look like you've had quite an adventure. You all right?" Harold glanced at the others. Their expressions were a mix of weariness and disbelief. "Yeah, just a rough day. It's a long story," he replied, trying to downplay the events. The moment had felt unbelievable. Once they secured their rooms, the group gathered in a small lounge area, the muted television casting a soft glow. Conversations flowed gradually, with each person recounting their perspective of the harrowing chase. Harold silently listened, reflecting on his views, keenly aware of how much their perception of the creature had shifted in just a few hours. Eventually, the conversation turned to the topic of the woods and their mystery. "What do you think's out there? Just Bigfoot? Or are there more secrets lurking?" the woman asked, breaking into a slight smile. Harold felt a warmth spread through him at the question. "There's definitely more. We just need to be open to understanding it. The wilderness has always held mysteries, and Bigfoot is just one piece of that puzzle." The bearded man leaned back, contemplating. "You may be onto something. Maybe, with respect and caution, we can embrace nature instead of fear it." As the night unfolded, they shared stories and laughter, allowing the adrenaline to fade beneath the weight of camaraderie and a newfound perspective. Harold felt grateful to be surrounded by others who had shared the same harrowing experience. Yet, bridging the gap to understanding, their wild encounters began. But as he turned to the window, gazing into the dark forest beyond the motel, he couldn't help but wonder what else remained hidden in those depths. He could still feel the pulse of the woods, a heartbeat that resonated with life and secrets, both beautiful and terrifying. A sense of purpose ignited within him, a promise to carry this newfound understanding of nature into the world beyond the woods. Tomorrow he would share the stories, the truths he'd gleaned from this horrifying experience. He would tell others to respect the wild, to understand that other beings inhabit this earth alongside humanity, each with its own role and place. As he turned away from the window, the conversations around him faded into a comforting background hum. After a night filled with restless thoughts, Harold finally slipped into a fitful sleep, haunted by dreams of the creature, the moss-covered trees, and the shimmering lake that had both offered refuge and unleashed terror. He awoke early, the dawn light spilling into the room, and felt a renewed sense of energy fill him. He tiptoed out into the quiet motel corridor, deciding to take a moment for himself before the others stirred. Stepping outside, he noticed a soft chill in the morning air, the world bathed in the gentle glow of the rising sun. As he walked toward the edge of the forest, something compelled him to explore. The memories of his encounter surged back. He could still feel Bigfoot's powerful presence. Climbing to a nearby hill that overlooked the woods seemed like a perfect way to connect further with his thoughts. but slide between two trees. He was just about to reach it. Making his way up the hill, he felt the cool blades of grass underfoot, the slight crunch of twigs echoing beneath him. When he reached the summit, he halted, taking in the sprawling view of the forest, stretching out toward the horizon. The rustling leaves whispered secrets as the gentle breeze swept through, and for a moment, he felt at peace, surrounded by the beauty of nature. It was in this tranquil setting that he began to reflect more deeply on the creature. It intrigued him to think of the stories left untold, what Bigfoot had witnessed through the years in its isolated habitat. What fears and challenges did it face, and what had brought it to react the way it had, making music that breathed darkly into the night. As Harold absorbed the surroundings, he realized how interconnected everything was. The trees, the water, the creatures roaming these woods, including himself. Every entity played a role in the ecosystem, and he understood now that fear stemmed from misunderstanding. After some time, he decided to head back down to the motel, energized and inspired by the moment. He felt a sense of duty to ensure that this experience wouldn't merely fade into a distant memory, but would serve a greater purpose. Once he rejoined the group in the lounge, they were already gathering for breakfast. The air, filled with the scent of coffee and pastries, a peaceful atmosphere pervading the room. It felt good to see the camaraderie amongst them as they exchanged stories, laughter, softening the edges of their shared trauma. "Harold, we're glad you're back. We were just talking about our next adventure," the woman said, looking genuinely pleased. Though maybe not in the woods again for a while. He smiled, but something stirred within him as he took a seat. "What if we do go back?" he said, voicing his inner thoughts, but with a focus on understanding. Maybe we could document our experiences to help others, or start a project that fosters respect for the wilderness. The group exchanged looks. Curiosity piqued. A project? Like what? Something that spreads awareness about the importance of wildlife preservation, Harold responded, gaining momentum. We could reach out to local communities, schools, or even create a blog or video series, share our story, including how we misunderstood what we encountered. It could educate people about coexisting with the wild, not fearing it. Thanks. The other hikers nodded, the idea taking root. Slowly, a discussion started to blossom. They shared potential plans, locations they could investigate, safe practices for exploring nature, and ways to present the project to others. Sitting together, each person laying out ideas, a sense of purpose grew stronger. They couldn't change the world overnight, but they could create ripples of understanding that spread through their communities, changing lives and perspectives. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Harold felt invigorated, fortified by the knowledge that he was no longer alone in this endeavor. The fear that had consumed them just a day before was now transforming into a collective mission. Each added idea sparked creative energy in the room, weaving a tapestry of possibilities. Over breakfast, they brainstormed names for their initiative. The bearded man suggested Guardians of the Wild, which received nods of approval. Harold loved the sentiment. It captured not just their experience with Bigfoot, but also the deeper respect for nature they aimed to promote. "I can set up a website," the woman chimed in. "We could use it to document our journeys, share posts about wildlife conservation, and even invite people to contribute their own stories. Definitely, we could create educational resources, pamphlets for nature walks, maybe a presentation for schools," Harold added, excitement bubbling within him as they fed off one another's energy. "Take a seat. There's a local community center that often hosts workshops. We could reach out to them," replied another hiker, enthusiasm rising as they planned a coordinated outreach effort. Once breakfast concluded, the energy shifted toward action. They gathered their things, each person fueled by the same mission. "Let's drive back to the cabin area," Harold suggested, feeling that returning to the place where it all began could ground them in purpose. "We can lay the groundwork for our project there." The group piled into the car, a shared determination coursing through them as they journeyed back toward the forest. Along the way, they discussed potential locations near the original cabin where they could set up base for future exploration. Places where they could observe wildlife, educate visitors, and find ways to mitigate human-wildlife conflicts. As they neared the area, memories of their encounter flooded back. The lake shimmered under the sun, but now it didn't invoke fear. Instead, it represented resilience, a reminder of their connection to the raw essence of nature. Once they arrived, they parked in the same spot Harold had during his fishing trip. The familiar cabin stood still amid the towering pines, but it was laden with a heavy nostalgia for what they had endured. Instead of approaching it with trepidation, they approached it as a catalyst for learning. "We should start right here," Harold said, gesturing toward the nearby clearing. "This is where it all happened. Let's document our feelings and experiences using this space." They set up in the clearing, capturing the ambience of the woods around them. Harold took a moment to collect his thoughts, feeling the weight of his earlier fears began to dissipate, replaced by a powerful urge to create something meaningful. Together they gathered materials, notebooks, scraps of paper, and even an old camera one of them dug out. Harold proposed that each person write down their individual encounter, what they had felt in the moment, and what they would want others to learn from it. Better. Once they finished, they shared their thoughts aloud, each story rich with emotion and reflection. They held discussions that revealed deeper connections to their experiences, what Bigfoot represented in each of their lives, from fears to newfound respect for untamed wildlife. With the sun beginning its descent, casting soft shadows across the clearing, they felt a sense of closure with the day. It was more than just a temporary project. This was the start of a movement, rooted in respect and awareness. As they packed up their belongings and prepared to leave, Harold felt a presence beside him. He turned to see one of the hikers, a gentle smile on her face. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we encountered Bigfoot," she said. "I see it now as a unique chance to foster change, not just for ourselves, but for all of nature." Harold nodded, feeling invigorated. The forest around them seemed alive with promise. Paused, and then said, several times as though impressed with something significant, Let's keep this momentum going, he agreed. Together, we can change the narrative. With their spirits high and the world ahead filled with opportunity, they climbed back into the car. As they drove away, the trees and the lake gradually faded from view. But they all knew they were leaving something profound behind. A commitment to protect and understand both the wild and each other. This wasn't just about Bigfoot. It was about embracing the wildness of nature and the wildness within themselves. They had ventured into the unknown, faced fear, and emerged stronger, ready to advocate for a deeper connection with the natural world. And as they drove off toward the sunset, Harold couldn't help but smile, knowing that new journeys awaited them, each aimed at opening hearts and minds to coexist with the wild.